The room is loud, not with sound but with silence. A silence so thick it presses against your skull. A vacuum where understanding should be. You speak, but your words dissolve before they reach anyone. They nod, they smile, but their eyes glaze over like frosted glass. You see the truth, ugly, raw, undeniable. But when you point to it, they call you mad. Or worse, they pity you. This is the curse of seeing what others refuse to. You are not blind. That is your crime. In a world that worships distraction, your clarity is a threat. In a society that rewards conformity, your insight is a defect. The wiser you become, the heavier the isolation grows. The more you understand, the less you belong. Nietzsche called it the fate of the free spirit. Whoever thinks great thoughts must also err greatly. To see beyond the illusions of your time is to stand alone on a precipice, staring into the abyss of collective delusion. The crowd does not hate truth. It simply does not recognize it. And when truth wears the face of discomfort, the crowd will choose the lie every time. Why? Because lies are easy. Lies are warm. Lies fit neatly into the grooves of what we already believe. But truth is a blade. It cuts. It demands. It unravels the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night. And so, the wise are exiled, not by force, but by quiet, suffocating indifference. Consider this. What happens to a mind that sees too much in a world that sees too little? It is not just loneliness. It is something deeper, more corrosive. A slow erosion of faith in the very act of communication. You begin to question your own sanity. Are they all blind, or am I the one hallucinating? The more you know, the more you realize how little others want to know. The more you awaken, the more you realize how deeply others prefer to sleep. And here lies the great unspoken tragedy. Wisdom does not elevate you in the eyes of the world. It alienates you. The marketplace does not reward those who see through its games. It ostracizes them. The herd does not follow the one who warns of the cliff ahead. It tramples him in its rush toward the edge. So you stand at the crossroads of a terrible choice. Do you dull your mind to fit in? Or do you sharpen it and accept the solitude that follows? This is not an abstract dilemma. It is a lived horror for anyone who has ever tried to think freely in a world that punishes dissent. The more you question, the fewer answers you find. Not because the answers aren't there, but because the questions themselves are forbidden. And so we arrive at the great, aching question. Is it better to be wise and exiled, or ignorant and embraced? The answer is not simple. It never is. But the weight of it presses down on you, heavier with each passing day. Because you already know the truth. You have felt it in your bones, in the quiet moments when the masks slip. The curse is not just seeing. It is knowing that seeing changes nothing, unless you are willing to pay the price. And the price is everything. You are not the first to feel this way. Centuries before you, another mind grappled with the same suffocating truth. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who dared to stare into the void without flinching, wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. This is not a personal failing. It is a structural one. Society is not designed for thinkers, for seers, for those who refuse to kneel before its idols. It is designed for cohesion, for predictability, for the smooth functioning of the machine. And the machine has no use for parts that question its purpose." The psychology of the herd. Why does the crowd reject the wise? Carl Jung understood this well. He called it collective consciousness, the submerged, unthinking mass of beliefs, fears and assumptions that dictate how a society functions. To step outside of it is to become a heretic, a threat. The herd does not hate you for being different. It fears what your difference implies. If you are right, then they might be wrong. And that is an unbearable thought. This is why Socrates was forced to drink poison. Why Galileo was silenced. Why every prophet, philosopher, and revolutionary has been met with resistance, ridicule, or violence. The moment you disrupt the shared illusion, you become dangerous. But the problem runs deeper than mere social rejection. It is wired into human biology. The neurological betrayal: your brain is not built for truth. It is built for survival. Cognitive biases, confirmation bias, the bandwagon effect, the backfire effect, all serve one purpose: to protect the ego, to preserve the status quo. When faced with information that contradicts deeply held beliefs, the mind does not adjust. It resists, it distorts, it attacks. This is why facts alone cannot change a mind. This is why the wisest among us are so often ignored. The crowd does not lack intelligence, it lacks the capacity to endure the cognitive dissonance that truth demands. The comfort of delusion: Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. But most people never reach the 3rd stage. They cling to their delusions because those delusions keep them safe. Safe from uncertainty, from responsibility, from the terrifying freedom of having to think for themselves. Aldous Huxley foresaw a world where people would love their oppression, where they would drown truth in a sea of irrelevance. We live in that world now. Distraction is the new opiate. Ignorance is not forced, it is chosen. The existential dilemma: Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to escape the burden of freedom. Most people would rather believe a comfortable lie than face an uncomfortable truth. And so, they trade wisdom for belonging. But what happens to the one who refuses? Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, understood that meaning is found not in comfort, but in struggle. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. The wise have no choice but to change, because the world will not change for them. The unseen war: this is not a passive phenomenon. It is an active suppression. And so, the wise find themselves in a silent war. Not against ignorance, but against an entire machinery designed to perpetuate it. The question is no longer why this happens. The question is, what do you do now that you see it? The tragedy is not just that society rejects wisdom, it's what happens after. You begin to doubt yourself. You start to wonder if the problem is you. Maybe you're too intense, too demanding, too unwilling to play the game. Maybe happiness lies in surrendering to the collective hypnosis. So you try, you force a smile, you nod along, you bite your tongue when the conversation turns to things you know are lies. But the moment you do, something inside you dies. The slow erosion of the self: this is the first consequence. Self-betrayal. Every time you suppress an insight to avoid conflict, every time you pretend ignorance to fit in, you fracture your integrity. Carl Jung warned of this. The shadow, the repressed parts of ourselves, we disown to gain acceptance. But the shadow does not disappear. It grows. It festers. It becomes resentment, bitterness, a quiet self-loathing for the cowardice of conformity. You were not meant to live like this. The loneliness of the awake. The second consequence is isolation, not just social, but existential. You can be surrounded by people and yet feel utterly alone, because the connections that sustain others do not sustain you. Small talk feels like suffocation. Superficial relationships leave you starving. You crave depth, but depth is a liability in a world that values only surfaces. Nietzsche called this the desert grows. The more you see, the more barren the world becomes. The gaslighting of the wise. The third consequence is psychological warfare. When you refuse to participate in delusions, you're called arrogant. The system doesn't just ignore dissent, it pathologizes it. This is how society breaks the thinkers, not by arguing with them, but by convincing them they're broken. The paralysis of over-understanding. The fourth consequence is inaction. When you see too much, the manipulation, the cycles of stupidity, the endless repetition of history's mistakes, it's easy to fall into nihilism. Why fight if nothing changes? Why speak if no one listens? This is the trap of the foolish wise. Those who know so much, they forget how to do anything. The silent death of potential. The final consequence is the most devastating. A world robbed of its truth-tellers. Every time a wise person is worn down into silence, humanity loses a voice that could have altered its course. Every time a free mind is crushed under the weight of collective stupidity, the future dims just a little more. This is not theoretical. Look around. The crises we face, political, environmental, spiritual, are not accidents. They are the inevitable result of a system that rewards blindness and punishes vision. The crossroads, so here you stand. You can feel the cost of wisdom now. It's not just alienation. It's the slow, grinding pressure to stop seeing, to look away, to join the crowd in its march toward the cliff. But there's another path, one that Nietzsche hinted at when he wrote, "You must become chaos to give birth to a dancing star." The way out is not to surrender, it's to burn brighter. The moment you realize you're trapped is the moment your chains begin to dissolve. This is not about fighting society, it's about transcending it. Not through anger, not through withdrawal, but through a ruthless reclamation of your own mind. The prison is not out there, it's in here. And the key has been in your hands all along. The first act of defiance, absolute honesty, begin with this radical premise. You will no longer lie to yourself, not even politely, not even to soften the blow. Every rationalization you've used to tolerate the intolerable, strip it away. Every time you've said, "It's not that bad when it was," every time you've swallowed your words to keep the peace, that ends now. Viktor Frankl survived the camps by realizing one unshakable truth. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Your first act of rebellion. Choose to see clearly, no matter how much it hurts. The second act, strategic withdrawal. You do not owe the world your exhaustion. When Diogenes lived in his barrel, when Thoreau retreated to Walden Pond, they weren't running away. They were creating the distance needed to see the madness for what it was. You must do the same. This isn't about physical isolation, though sometimes that helps. It's about mental sovereignty, building an inner citadel no crowd noise can penetrate. Ask yourself, whose voices am I letting colonize my mind? What am I consuming that's making me weaker? Where do I need to draw boundaries to protect my clarity? Cut the cords. The world will try to guilt you for it. Let it. The third act, the reclamation of language. They've poisoned the words. Crazy, extreme, unrealistic. These are the labels slapped on anyone who thinks outside the cage. Take them back. Wear them as badges of honor. When Nietzsche declared God is dead, he wasn't making a theological statement. Was announcing the collapse of old meanings. Your task is the same, to redefine what matters on your own terms. Start small. Stop saying sorry when you're not. Call things by their true names. Let your speech be uncompromising. Even if your voice shakes, language is power. Reclaim yours. The fourth act, the cultivation of contempt. This will be controversial. You must learn to despise, not people, but the cheap values they worship, the mindless consumerism, the performative outrage, the cowardice masquerading as virtue. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Let your contempt be selective. Let it burn away everything unworthy of you." The fifth act, the creation of a new tribe. You will find your people, but not where you've been looking. They're in the margins, in the footnotes of history books, in the pages of philosophy. Most never read. They're the ones who've also seen behind the curtain. Find them. Or if you can't, become the person they would seek. The final realization, none of this is about changing the world. It's about making yourself immune to its stupidity. When Camus wrote about Sisyphus happy, he revealed the ultimate rebellion, to find meaning in the pushing itself. Your wisdom is your rock. Keep pushing. There comes a moment, if you persist, when the entire illusion shatters. It is not that society is stupid. It is that stupidity serves a purpose. The distractions, the lies, the herd mentality, they are not accidents. They are the glue holding together a civilization terrified of its own fragility. But you were never meant to be part of that glue. The first layer, the illusion of progress. We tell ourselves we're evolving, that each generation grows wiser, that yet history's greatest minds, from Plato to Schopenhauer, All lamented the same cyclical ignorance. Why? Because humanity does not seek truth, it seeks comfort, and comfort is the enemy of awakening, your realization. The world does not want to be saved. Not truly, not if salvation requires discomfort. This is why every prophet is first ridiculed, then worshipped, but only after their message has been sanitized into uselessness. The second layer, the myth of belonging here, is the cruel joke. You've spent your life craving acceptance from a world you instinctively knew was wrong. The loneliness you felt wasn't abandonment. It was your soul's refusal to celebrate its own chains. Nietzsche's madman wasn't tragic because no one listened. He was tragic because he expected them to. The breakthrough comes when you stop expecting. The third layer, the alchemy of suffering all this time. You thought your isolation was the wound. It was the medicine. Every moment you spent screaming into the void forged something in you that the crowd can never touch. That gnawing emptiness, it was making space for something greater. Viktor Frankl called it tragic optimism. The ability to find meaning seems impossible. You don't transcend the curse of wisdom. You weaponize it. The final revelation, you are the wilderness civilization, is a collective hallucination. But you are the part that refused to hallucinate. This is why you've always felt half feral, because part of you is. The part that knows clocks are lies, that money is fiction, that every rule was made up by some long-dead fool terrified of his own shadow. The ultimate truth, you went cursed with wisdom. You were spared the curse of ignorance. The choice that remains now, you see the game for what it is. You can play, but never be played again. You can walk among men, but never mistake the crowd for home. You can love the world, but never need its permission to breathe. This is freedom. Not the absence of chains, but the realization that you've held the key all along. The last fire, they will call you arrogant. Good. Arrogance is what the domesticated call the scent of wildness, still clinging to those who refuse to be tamed. Let them stare. Let them whisper. You have better things to do than convince ants of mountains. The desert grows? Good. You were always meant to thrive in wastelands.